I'd like to thank the survivors of this long day, those who have remained behind. Now, I'm going to try and be very quick because many people have a train to catch. It's very simple to sum up today. Usually conclusions are already made, but rather I really listened hard, and the conclusion, in fact, could be very simple. If you like, it could be a public suicide if I, in fact, I burn up the work of today. But I think that there are many, many points of hope that can be drawn from what we learned today. First of all, acknowledgement of what AlmaLaurea is doing, because having collected 2,000 resumes or curricula and put them together, organized them, has certainly made more fluid the work market. And this is an infectious activity. It's touched many other countries, and therefore I think that this, for the future, can be an example which can be taken to the global level. We have a work mobility without having the knowledge on the work market. AlmaLaurea is in fact showing this extraordinary fact. We have to admit it. It's a very interesting history and story that it has. I was lucky to be able to follow it right from the beginning when it started with very few means, and the country as a whole didn't cooperate. Milanese University, Pisa, Palermo, and others, and Pavia do not participate any as yet in AlmaLaurea. It's an incredible fact that, because these things are valid, and have all the more worth if it involves everybody. This is an enormous advantage and instrument to have these things put on the net, an advantage for companies, and they can have a reference framework that otherwise would require enormous figures to be able to put together. And therefore, we got this together with very few means. For example, if we think of what is done by the ministry, and what AlmaLaurea has got together with its very poor and scant funds. Now, we don't have too many graduates. There was an overall agreement on that factor. And it was also said, compared to 10 years ago, higher education, even if a little less, as I say, than 10 years ago, does in fact prove to be an employment or unemployment insurance, or an insurance against unemployment. Not as much as in the past, but still it is an insurance. I'm synthesizing and summing up. But we don't need just more graduates, but we need also an enormous critical mass of graduates in engineering, in the applied sciences. It's a technical question. It's not just a question of quantity, but of quality, of what people are getting their degrees in, because in fact our development wasn't developed by the lawyers or by economists. It was done by technical people, and this is the population that we have to grow. When, for example, as was said by one speaker, people think that trade schools and technical schools are a lower level than others. Well, the country is not going to create wealth. And this is the country. This is what the country needs. The country needs to pedal on this technical ability and the skills that we have, the fact that the UK, after having in fact denigrated its industrial policy and its industrial activities, and now turning around and giving incentives to it. And in fact, I said this, in fact, for the first time in the world, being considered a very dangerous communist, when I said that the manufacturing of a country is the most important thing it has. And I think we're now as we say, we're in a society that has lost its values. We have to, in fact, I think, have campaigns in the TV to push these ideas across, to develop technical schools at a fitting for the sort of society that we're in. But these are very elementary recipes that we're having. The Department of Technical Engineering is being closed in our Ministry for Education. And, for example, if people go abroad, well, at least they'll find a job. And I remember 40 years ago, in fact, when I wrote an article against the exporting of capital, and somebody wrote me a letter and said that, well, that's all capital which is being shored away for our recovery. And if you like, you could say the same thing about the graduates who go abroad. They are hope for the future recovery of our country. And we mustn't have different policies to the policies that are required for research and development, that go against research and development. If we adopt the real doctrine that to be able to create jobs, you have to grow, well, then, and there are other problems of economic policy, etc., that I'm not going to go into. But in this school, if this is your aim to grow, you have to have a school which helps us to grow. And that has become evident now. It's on the lips of everybody. So I think today we have learned an important message that we have to get across to the authorities and those that take decisions in this area, because clearly there is, in fact, complaints and people groan and whinge against the fall in R&D and so on. But if we're not growing, where can we get the money for R&D? Finally, what is coming to the light again, if you read the latest book of Mariana Mazzucati, who in fact is rediscovering something which 30 years ago was common knowledge, that the state has a role in the economy, has always had it, also very much so in the US, in the space industry, military technology, and so on. And now we are rediscovering, after so many years, something that was very blatantly obvious. And what we heard with regard to R&D, I think we have to repeat with regard to what was said about startups, new companies getting off the ground. The figures that we have heard today are desolate. Practically, there are no startups when you talk about 1,100. That's nothing. And especially, I can't remember the names of any startups that have really become big companies. I can tell you many names in France, Germany, the US, but Italian startups that then have made it big, I don't know of any, because they either in fact, to get to a certain point, and then they sell the molecule. If they're in the pharmaceutical sector, they sell out to a U.S. company, or they don't really get much further than a mere startup because they don't have the backing of their country. Now, what's the consoling aspect which puts forward some possibility and glimmer of hope for the future, and that is that our graduates that have gone abroad go abroad, especially to Europe. And when we increasingly create an integrated employment market, the process of integration will set about conditions which I think will make a return easier. And this will be easier if the graduates are in Europe than if they are across the Atlantic, and they have uprooted themselves so dramatically that it's very unlikely that these people who've gone to the United States will ever return. Now, the complaint and the lament today that we can't find highly skilled workers is something which is all important. But in fact, what is being done about is simply incomprehensible. The thing that really amazed me in this country, stunned me in this country, was that recourse was made to the tribunal in the Lombardy region against teaching English at schools, and that people wanted this to be rejected by the court. The fact that one can go to the court for something like this means that, in fact, our country is working with a very creaking old system. And also the professors or teachers who can't teach in English are doing their utmost to try and keep their little corner and stop people coming in from outside, and to protect their little realm of power, because that, of course, stymies all possibilities of us being able to have people coming in from abroad. Now, the professor was talking about having a target of people that we want to bring to Italy, and that the workers coming in are only non-skilled or only poorly skilled workers. This is a system that cannot work and cannot import, in fact, more specialized workers. And here we come to a very important issue, which is the position of our technology and the position that it will have in the wider world. And we are specialists not in some fundamental scientific areas, but we're very advanced in the interweave of various technologies and in the coupling of these technologies. From this point of view, at a much lower level, we are fairly similar to the type of economic development that Germany has enjoyed, because electronic industry exports more directly and immediately to China, and it's much easier to, in fact, export the IT rather than the packaging techniques, as Marquezini showed. Here we have, in the packaging industry, for example, the coming together of many technologies, metalworking, the technology from a mechanical point of view, and also hydraulics and IT. And this is the fruit of a very complex process and learning by doing that has gone on for years, which is much more difficult to imitate and counterfeit and copy. And this is something that we have to underline. The institutions must help these activities of Italy. And in fact, in Germany, you have the Max Planck for high technology, and then there's for the Fraunhofer for medium type of technology. So if a smaller company needs a technological vision, that it cannot develop because it is too small, but which it needs for its products. For example, if a particular manufacturer needs a particular adhesive, well, there is this specific technological department or institute which will help these small companies that can't develop it in-house. And this is the sort of thing that we need to develop our country. We don't need different people. Let me conclude with this, because I see that some people are not just tired, they seem to be near collapse after a day like this. Now, the question of unemployment and employment, we are at a turning point, and we don't seem to be able to recognize it. Everything that information technology is, and what we have been heard about, that they've transformed the world, that they are marvelous, that our children from 2 have become digitally conversant. Well, this new technological IT world, in fact, cuts jobs and kills jobs. And this is a problem that we are going to have to manage in the future with instruments that we won't, and as yet do not recognize as needing or as having to have. Because, in fact, we see a destruction of the average bracket and average section of workers and employment. In the first stage of the industrial third revolution, well, it destroyed the lower brackets and the lower echelons of workers. And now we're seeing the intermediate market, which in fact is being touched. Hundreds of thousands of secretaries are being dispensed of. And it doesn't create a critical mass. When I ask people in charge of banks whether in 10 years' time that person's bank that I go to will be the same, and they say that there'll be less than half of the employees in 10 years' time in the bank. For example, all the draftsmen have lost their jobs. A large company will have 3 or 4 draftsmen, and that's all. So it's destroying the middle segment. And we're only halfway there. For example, it's not that the low-level worker is really at risk that much, or as much at risk, or more at risk, but also the level higher up. And we are, in fact, crushed by these two. And that's why we have to enhance those areas where we are and do have a head start. And that is the only way to go ahead. Just one last thought. The strategy of going towards the Mediterranean, that's a very good strategy. But here we have to remind ourselves that Italy has a task. European policy for the Mediterranean is shameful. It really is shameful. All the proposals made by the friends to involve the countries of the Mediterranean. I remember in the EU, I battled to have a mixed university, to have a headquarters in Catania and in Tunis, and to share the students. The students would have to carry out and study 2 years in one place and 2 years on the other side of the Mediterranean. This was absolutely thrown out by the northern countries, and that's quite extraordinary, not understanding that this is a question, an economic question. It's also a question of security, and it's helping to take a step in the direction of creating the world of the future. I mean, all the tensions and difficulties that we have in now, we could in fact have been able to help with the Arab Spring and induce less tension, having somebody closer, and not have a policy which clicks in only when the revolution has in fact burst out and exploded. I think this is a role that Italy does have, despite our limited means, but we do have the possibility to do something in this area. To be able to do this, however, we have to grow our employment rates, we have to grow in confidence to be able to redress the situation and also to give some hope for the future and at least put off suicide.